The Viking Age, spanning roughly from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century, presented a world vastly different from the one a modern human is accustomed to. Unlike today's urbanized, climate-controlled environments with instant access to food, medicine, and shelter, the Viking era was defined by a harsh, often unforgiving natural landscape. The climate of Scandinavia was cold, with long winters and brief summers. Survival depended heavily on physical endurance, knowledge of the land, and the ability to adapt quickly to constantly changing and often dangerous conditions. For a modern individual suddenly dropped into this time, the first shock would be the environment itself. No electricity, no running water, no supermarkets, no hospitals, just raw nature, stone, wood, and the constant threat of the elements. The lack of modern hygiene and medical care would make even minor injuries or illnesses potentially fatal. Diseases that are easily treated today could rapidly become life-threatening. Exposure to the cold without proper Viking-style clothing and shelter would lead to hypothermia or frostbite. Hunger would be a constant companion. Access to food would rely entirely on hunting, gathering, fishing, or farming skills that most modern people have never learned. Furthermore, Vikings were not merely surviving. They were thriving through social structures built on strength, cooperation, and warfare. Physical toughness was not optional, it was a necessity. The day-to-day life demanded labor-intensive tasks like chopping wood, building homes, crafting tools, farming, and fighting. The level of physical fitness and stamina required was far beyond the average modern sedentary lifestyle. For someone unprepared, this disparity would be immediately noticeable and life-threatening. Modern humans generally have lower baseline physical fitness levels compared to historical populations who lived active, labor-intensive lives. A sudden plunge into Viking life would expose these physical shortcomings instantly. Basic survival tasks such as carrying heavy loads of firewood, digging soil for crops, or enduring long treks through forested or mountainous terrain would exhaust an average modern person within days. The body would face muscle fatigue, joint strain, and possible injuries simply from repetitive manual labor. Beyond the physical, the psychological shock would be profound. The Viking Age was not only harsh in terms of nature, but also in terms of social expectations and norms. Fear, uncertainty, and isolation would be magnified by the absence of modern communication and social comforts. A modern individual, accustomed to constant digital connection and social validation, might quickly feel disoriented and depressed. The absence of entertainment, news, or even music could create a sense of profound loneliness. Moreover, the daily stress of potential attacks from rival clans or wild animals would add to a constant state of alertness and fear. Vikings lived with violence as a reality of existence. Raids, battles, and punishments were frequent. A modern person, not trained in self-defense or survival combat, would be vulnerable not only to nature but also to human threats. Lastly, the mental resilience required to endure extreme weather, hunger, and physical pain is something cultivated through experience and cultural conditioning. Without it, modern individuals might quickly succumb to despair or poor decision-making, decreasing their chances of long-term survival. Nutrition is a cornerstone of survival, and in the Viking era, securing food was an ongoing challenge that required knowledge, skill, and perseverance. Modern humans typically enjoy abundant, calorie-rich, and nutritionally balanced diets delivered through supermarkets, ready meals, and fast food. In contrast, Vikings depended largely on what they could grow, hunt, fish, or forage seasonally. For a modern person unfamiliar with these practices, obtaining enough calories would be a significant obstacle. Viking diets consisted primarily of grains like barley and rye, supplemented by dairy, meat from livestock and wild game, fish, and gathered berries or wild plants. Food storage was primitive and relied heavily on drying, smoking, or fermenting to last through the winter months. Without knowing how to prepare and preserve food safely, modern individuals might face starvation quickly. Hunting and fishing require patience, skill, and knowledge of animal behavior and tracking, abilities most people today lack. Gathering wild edible plants also carries risks due to the potential of mistaking toxic flora for safe ones. Attempting to survive solely on unfamiliar and possibly unsafe food sources would shorten survival time drastically. Moreover, malnutrition and dehydration could set in rapidly. Modern humans are accustomed to consistent water purification and regulated diet, but Vikings drank untreated water from rivers or collected rainwater. The risk of parasites or bacterial infections was high. A modern person without immunity to local diseases and parasites would likely suffer from digestive illnesses, reducing their strength and further jeopardizing survival. One of the greatest hurdles for a modern human thrust into the Viking Age would be the lack of modern shelter and clothing. Today's insulated homes, weatherproof fabrics, and heating systems provide comfort and protection from extreme weather conditions. The Vikings, however, relied on rudimentary wooden longhouses insulated with turf and animal hides, and clothing made from wool, linen, and animal skins, materials crafted and layered with great skill to withstand the cold northern climate. Without knowledge of how to build or maintain such shelters, a modern individual could quickly fall victim to hypothermia during the long winters. The ability to start and maintain fire using primitive methods would be crucial but difficult without prior experience. Fire was the heart of warmth, cooking, protection from predators, and even social interaction in Viking society. A failure to produce and sustain fire regularly would mean death from exposure in cold months. Clothing was another vital defense against the elements. Viking garments were designed to trap heat and repel moisture but required understanding of animal skinning, tanning, and weaving techniques. A modern human, lacking these skills and with no access to synthetic fibers, would struggle to stay warm, dry, and healthy. Constant dampness and cold could lead to respiratory infections, frostbite, and reduced physical capacity. Additionally, Vikings knew how to shield themselves from natural dangers, including wild animals like wolves and bears. Living within fortified villages or communal longhouses provided security that an isolated modern person would lack. Alone and unfamiliar with the local fauna, a modern human would be vulnerable to animal attacks, especially during hunting or gathering expeditions. Perhaps the most critical factor affecting the survival time of a modern individual in Viking times is the absence of modern medicine. Viking medicine was rudimentary, relying on herbal remedies, basic surgical procedures like tooth extraction, and spiritual healing. There was no understanding of germs or sterile environments, making infections from even minor wounds deadly. A modern person would face numerous health threats, including infections from cuts or scrapes acquired during daily labor. Without antibiotics or proper wound care, small injuries could become fatal. Furthermore, parasites such as lice, ticks, and intestinal worms were common and untreatable by modern standards back then. These infestations would cause weakness, anemia, and increased vulnerability to disease. Nutritional deficiencies, such as scurvy caused by lack of vitamin C, were common in Viking populations during winter months. A modern person unfamiliar with local edible plants or preservation techniques might suffer from similar deficiencies, reducing immune function and physical endurance. The presence of contagious diseases like tuberculosis or smallpox, to which Vikings had some exposure and partial immunity, could be catastrophic for a modern individual with no natural immunity to those strains. Likewise, the lack of dental care would mean rapid deterioration of teeth and mouth infections, impacting the ability to eat and maintain strength. Mental health, too, would be challenged by the isolation, constant threat, and physical hardships of Viking life. Without access to modern psychological support or even basic rest, stress and trauma could severely impair decision-making and survival chances. In Viking society, survival was not just about individual toughness but about social cohesion and shared knowledge. Being part of a clan or community meant access to resources, protection, and the transmission of essential survival skills from a young age. For a modern person suddenly placed in this world, social integration would be extremely difficult. Language barriers, unfamiliar customs, and distrust of strangers would isolate the individual. Without the ability to communicate or contribute meaningfully to the community's survival tasks, such as farming, crafting, or defending the village, the modern human would likely be marginalized or even expelled. Moreover, Viking survival skills were the result of years of practice and cultural immersion. A modern person would need to quickly learn how to make weapons, tools, and clothing from raw materials, how to hunt and fish using traditional techniques, and how to read weather signs to anticipate storms or seasonal changes. Without these skills, reliance on others would be critical, and not guaranteed. Physical stamina, resilience to pain and hardship, and adaptability were also vital. The modern lifestyle tends to prioritize mental work and convenience, not endurance in harsh environments. Even the simplest daily tasks like gathering firewood or tending to livestock demanded strength and stamina unfamiliar to many today. In summary, Unless the modern individual possessed exceptional survival training, knowledge of Viking-era skills, and the ability to integrate socially, their survival prospects would diminish rapidly. Survival in the Viking Age depended not only on physical prowess but equally on mental strength and adaptability. The psychological challenges posed by such a drastic lifestyle shift would be immense for a modern human. The constant uncertainty of food availability, exposure to violent raids, and the need for relentless work without modern conveniences would test mental resilience every day. The Vikings embraced a worldview where fate and courage were intertwined, and hardship was accepted as part of life. For a modern individual, whose mindset often centers around comfort and predictability, this cultural shift could cause severe stress and disorientation. Coping with isolation, fear, and the loss of modern social support systems would require a tremendous inner strength rarely demanded in contemporary life. Adaptability would be key. Learning to manage fear, regulate energy, and make quick decisions based on environmental cues would increase survival chances. For example, recognizing when to conserve energy during cold spells, or when to take risks for food, could make the difference between life and death. Without this mental flexibility, the modern human might waste precious energy or succumb to despair. Additionally, the ability to develop new habits, such as waking with the sun, enduring pain without complaint, or accepting harsh discipline, would be necessary. The mental shift from passive consumer to active survivor is profound and would dictate how long someone could endure. The natural environment of the Viking era presented cyclical and often brutal challenges. The long, dark winters with minimal daylight severely limited activities and food gathering. Harsh storms, snow, and freezing temperatures were daily threats. A modern human unaccustomed to these cycles might find their endurance rapidly tested. Winter scarcity meant reliance on stored food and efficient fire use. Without prior knowledge of food preservation, a person could quickly face starvation. The lack of vitamin-rich fresh foods during winter months could cause serious health declines. Moreover, frozen waterways and snowbound forests complicated travel and hunting, isolating individuals and communities. Summer brought its own challenges. Though warmer and brighter, summer also meant hard labor to plant crops, harvest, and repair homes and tools damaged by winter. The fast pace of seasonal work required stamina and timing. Failing to complete these tasks would have fatal consequences when winter returned. In addition, exposure to insects and diseases surged in warmer months. Malaria-like fevers, infections, and parasites became more active, adding health risks. For someone without immunity or medical knowledge, these seasonal variations compounded survival difficulties. Considering all the physical, psychological, social, and environmental factors, estimating how long a modern human could survive in the Viking era depends on multiple variables, including prior survival knowledge, physical fitness, and adaptability. A person with no survival skills or physical conditioning might last only a few days to a couple of weeks. Early threats would be exposure, hunger, and injury, followed quickly by illness. Failure to make fire, secure shelter, or find safe food would be critical weaknesses. Someone moderately prepared, for instance, with some wilderness survival training or physical fitness, might survive several months if they could find a supportive community or learn quickly from the environment. However, without Viking-era cultural integration and full understanding of local skills, this survival would be tenuous and stressful. Only individuals with extensive knowledge of primitive technologies, hunting, food preservation, and social dynamics would have a chance at longer-term survival. Even then, surviving a full year, including the harshest winter months, would be a significant achievement. In summary, a modern human abruptly transported to Viking times, lacking training and social support, would likely survive between a few weeks and several months, with most perishing before 1 year due to a combination of exposure, starvation, illness, and social isolation. The Viking Age stands as a powerful testament to human resilience, adaptability, and the capacity to endure extreme conditions without modern technology or comforts. For a modern human suddenly thrust into this world, survival would be an immense challenge, a test not only of physical strength but of mental fortitude, adaptability, and social integration. Without specialized survival skills, knowledge of the environment, and cultural understanding, the chances of lasting beyond a few months are slim. Exposure to cold, inadequate nutrition, untreated injuries, and psychological stress would conspire to shorten survival time drastically. Even those with some wilderness experience would face a steep learning curve adapting to the demands of Viking life, where community bonds and shared labor form the backbone of endurance. However, the hypothetical scenario also reveals the incredible potential of human beings to adapt under pressure. History shows that when motivated by necessity, humans can rapidly acquire new skills, develop resilience, and forge social ties essential for survival. A modern person equipped with an open mind, physical stamina, and a willingness to learn could extend their lifespan considerably, even in such a harsh context. Ultimately, this exploration highlights not only the stark contrast between modern convenience and historical reality, but also the enduring human spirit that bridges millennia. The Viking Age may seem distant and brutal, yet the core human challenges of shelter, food, health, and community remain constant. Survival depends on mastering these fundamentals, regardless of era, a humbling reminder of our roots and the fragility of modern life's comforts.